Hi everybody, thanks for having me here. A huge thank you to Type Brigade, Kenneth and Alana for inviting me to come out. This is only my second time in Vancouver and I'm very obsessed with the mountain air and the crisp, bright light. And I'm currently looking for an apartment, so if you find one, let me know. I'd also just like to give a shout out to Design Vancouver for also helping promote this event, my workshop that's coming up tomorrow. And I would be remiss as well to not mention some local sign painters. It's a really small sign painting community in Canada. There's some excellent sign painters based out of Victoria called the DeBell Brothers. Chris and Stu, I don't know if they're here, but anyway, great sign painters. Check them out on Instagram. Cody Swinkles is based out of Vancouver, and there's also a sign painter called John Lenig. So shout out, sign painting, still living. Also, a thank you to my friend Andre for giving me a place to stay while I'm here this week. And my partner Kyle came out this weekend to support me. He's always very patient when I insist on crossing the street to take pictures of signs. So thank you for always being patient. So here we go. Again, my name is Chris. I'm a freelance graphic designer, artist, and sign painter based out of Toronto. This is my 13th year of freelance. But before living in Toronto, I grew up in the middle of the prairies, a town called Swift Current, which is like 2 hours west, 2 hours east of
Prince Albert.
2 hours west of Regina. Not a lot going on there, but a lot of really fun, quirky signage. And as a little creative kid, I was always really drawn to letterforms. As a child, I would often sit at my grandma's kitchen table just writing in cursive. Like many grandmothers, she had beautiful cursive handwriting, so I would often trace it or just write all of our family members' names over and over again. I was also, as a young kid in the 90s, I was font obsessed. So it all just always came back to fonts and lettering. I knew very soon in high school that I wasn't going to be able to stay in Swift Current and make a go of it. So with the help of really great teachers, I found a program at the Alberta College of Art and Design and ended up moving to Calgary. I did not love the program at ACAD, so I ended up withdrawing. I moved over to the University of Calgary where I completed a BFA in theater design, which seems like a bit of a disconnect, but I was doing costume design, a lot of sketching, as well as scenic painting and set design, and it was working with letterforms in weird, different materials, large sizes, and it always came back to signs. It was around this time too that I had gotten a job at a stock photography company, which also sold a lot of fonts. This was the era of Jessica Hish was just getting into creating her own typefaces, Alejandro Paul, and this was the first time that I picked up my first set of brush pens, and I just started playing with brush pens. Again, hearkening to the cursive handwriting that I was doing as a kid, but with a bit more dynamic flair and a bit more, with a brush pen you get a lot more contrast, so it was all about experimenting. But it always came back to signs. So in 2013 was a huge turning point for me. This amazing documentary came out by Faith Levine and Sam Macon. There was also a companion book. Also, if you haven't seen this film, highly recommend. It exposed me to the huge, beautiful sign painting community, primarily based in the States. Two of the big players, if you don't know, are Mike Meyer and John Downer, both still alive, still creating signs. And they're featured in the film, and just seeing their work totally changed my whole perspective. It was around this time too that I discovered new Bohemia signs based out of San Francisco, so I picked up these guides just to start playing around. I found these really, really useful. And there is also a designer, I think, currently based out of Portland, who created these stunning zines that were a collection of all of his sign painting finds across America. He compiled these into these zines, and they're great, fantastic reference materials. So I picked up whatever brush I had, some paints. I started playing around, to like medium success. I was not thrilled. I was soon discovering the challenges of not having the right brushes, even the right paint. If you know anything about, say, sign painting, many sign painters use enamel paint, highly toxic, very stinky, requires very specialized cleaning with paint thinner and whatnot. And they do use expensive, high quality natural fiber quills that are often made out of animal hair. I didn't have any of this stuff, so I was just making the best of what I had. This was also the time that I moved to Toronto. And if anybody has been or had been to Toronto, at the corner of Bloor and Bathurst was an unbelievable department store called Honest Ed's, somewhere, definitely inspired somewhere between Vegas and Broadway. The owner created this department store. It was meant for deals and things, so the whole store was plastered with pricing and signs. Everything was on sale. And in its heyday, every department had a sign painter creating signs weekly to advertise what was on sale. So when you walk in there, signage is everywhere. And in 2014, I was able to interview one of the two remaining sign painters who still worked there up until the day it closed. I think it was a year later. This is Wayne Rubin, and this was for Uppercase magazine based out of Calgary. He showed me his studio, he showed me his supplies, and he also sort of opened my mind to the idea that I didn't necessarily need to have highly toxic, stinky enamel paint. He was literally using tempera. He had beautiful synthetic sign painting brushes that have longer bristles. They hold more paint. They create longer, beautiful strokes. But he was using tempera, and this was a game changer for me. So in 2018, as often is the case in freelance life, there's kind of ups and downs in client workflow. January, February is always a little bit quieter, so I took it upon myself that year to do the research, take the time, and dig in. So I went to all of the major research libraries in Eastern Canada, including the Toronto Reference Library, the big library in Ottawa, Montreal, and then some online resources. And I just pulled everything together. Honestly, I was actually kind of looking for the Holy Grail. I was trying to figure out if there was a definitive set of rules, guides, proportions on how to create the exact right sign painting letters. There isn't. At least I didn't find it. I found a lot of amazing sign painters, most of them based in North America, not necessarily. In the era, like 20th century leading up to like the 50s and 60s, and almost each one of them created their own little book or magazine with their set of tips and tricks and guides, preferred tools, all very subjective. So the lesson for me here was there's not really any rules. You can kind of make your own rules. So that summer, I started playing around with actual proportions and size using, I bought some proper brushes to use water-based paint, and I just started playing around. This was one project that I felt actually kind of came together cohesively. And then I decided to take what I'd learned and pull it together and present it to the public to see if we could if I could make it work, if I could show them what I had learned. So I built my own set of guides, and within each sheet, along with just the letterforms themselves at the top, it also lists my exact cap height, the exact stroke width, the brush size that I'm using, and I found that really useful. And basically with these, you place a layer of vellum on top, and you just use the guides almost like training wheels. So in 2019, we had a successful 2-day workshop at an art store in Toronto. It was also the hottest weekend of the year. We were sweating so much, but totally fun. And just at the moment when there was great momentum and people were getting really excited about things, pandemic hit, and not a lot of group things happened. I'm very grateful I got through it just fine. And in a weird way, it handed me this huge chunk of time to dedicate to a lot of personal projects that had been sitting on the back burner. So I, again, took the time, fleshed out these ideas, and I just painted for several months, actually. This is just a chunk of what I had done. A lot more of it is on my website. But basically just playing with pop art, Canadian packaging. There was a lot of queer ideas that I'd wanted to play with, and then I tried out this fun installation at a shop kind of around the corner from me. And then I got this weird knock on the door, or knock in my email inbox, from a company called Domestika, which is kind of like Skillshare. And they asked if I wanted to teach an online sign painting workshop. This was like, I think they emailed me in 2021. I wasn't going to say no. So they flew me out to New York that September, and we filmed a sign painting course over 4 days. Then they took 3 months, pulled it all together into, I think it ended up being about a 2-hour course over sort of chunks, and you learn how to research, how to do scratch drawings, layout, stroke exercises, and then in the end, the goal is to create one finished sign at whatever size that was. If you want to know more about the Domestika experience, we can chat after. But I think more interestingly, I'll share with you some recent sign painting projects and why they've really resonated with me. One of the first projects I did once I had sort of gotten comfortable with brushes were these banners for Pride Toronto. One of the reasons I really like this project, not only just because of the sort of modular letter forms and the simple use of color, was that sign painting itself has a strong root in activism. And if you think of many revolutions start with just one sign, one activist with a sign that they've made. So these signs really felt like they had meaning and impact, and they were in the biggest Pride parade in Canada, which was cool. This was a recent project last year for a restaurant in Toronto that recently had taken new management, and they were doing a whole brand refresh. So I helped them with some simple branding, a new word mark. They wanted it to feel very like New York vibes, sort of a timeless quality. And I think it was the right choice to paint the logos by hand on the window versus some sort of vinyl, because it really connected the restaurant with its past in the city. This was kind of cool, a cool project for CBC's show called Sort of. I think it was season 3, their last season. A producer had reached out to me. They wanted me to create a custom show card in my own style, but at a very large size that would be on set for the one artist studio scene. So it was really fun to work big, and it kind of reminded me of the scenic painting days of university. This was just recently for Chatelet magazine. The art director reached out to me. They were doing a how to save money article, and it was a really great fit just in terms of the content, because it was very honest ads, very like sales deals, how to save money. So we did a whole bunch of fun lettering and illustration work in a restricted color palette. And the reason I really like this project was it was one of those cases where we went from analog, I had to pull it into the digital world, and then it ended up back in print. And the quality on the paper actually feels really, like it really looks hand done. Like they did a really good job. So that was super fun. And then this was a out of nowhere project last year. Wonder, the bread company, reached out to me, and they were doing a huge print, web, TV commercial campaign, and their whole thing was featuring makers and artists. So I created this custom sign that ended up being in the commercial as well as on the landing page for several months. And I'm medium happy with the sign itself, but the project, it was one of the biggest things I'd ever done, and bigger clients, more stress. It was a big one, but totally fun. And then, as we mentioned, I'm back in workshop mode. There is a notable resurgence in interest in this type of craft, at least I've noticed in Ontario. I've done several workshops in Toronto, one in Calgary, one in Saskatoon, and then I'm doing one in Vancouver tomorrow that is almost sold out. So if you're interested even come talk to me after the workshop. I've got 1 or 2 spots left that I can probably fit you in. I'm just limited in terms of how much supplies that I have. But overall, I've found this is one of my favorite parts of the work that I do, is that moment when you're showing someone how to load the brush and create the stroke, and they have that moment of like, oh, yeah, like that's how it should look. So it's been great doing this. So yeah, if you're interested, come talk to me, please. So the future of sign painting, it's a good question. But I guess as an optimist, I feel pretty good about things. If you have seen the sign painting documentary and you know how sign painting history has happened, they've kind of already been through a demise. When the printing digital revolution happened in the 80s, many sign painters went out of business, were unemployed, gave up because printers and print shops took away all their work, and they were like, I don't want to buy a printer, I don't want to do this. So sign painting kind of died off. But now, at least in larger metropolitan cities, it feels like there's clients with interest, with the budget to try these things. And I feel relatively hopeful with a few projects here that I've done for these, for example, these transoms I've done over people's houses, over their doors. One thing that often comes up is the cost. And in these cases, you know, you could get it painted by hand, or you could probably get a printout done. I can usually do it for a decent rate, but most clients that I've worked with see the value in having it done by a person, an artist, a local artist. I like these in particular because it's the type of thing, theoretically, as long as the next homeowner doesn't have a drastic change in style, this is something that'll probably be there for the next homeowner and the next homeowner. It's a pretty good value. Like it's worth the investment. I also think that sign painting is a good way to connect to the past or the legacy of a company. This is a local independent grocery store based out of Welland, Ontario. It's been in the family for 60 years, 70 years, and they did a bit of a brand refresh recently, and we decided to do a banner for Christmas last year. But it really felt like this quality of like going into an independent grocery store that's been there for decades. It just has this feeling of like it's always been there. One final project that I bring up that isn't typographic sign painting in a conventional way, but Aesop, the hand care scent company, this year reached out to me asking if I would create these custom illustrations and then also paint them by hand at 2 stores in Toronto, 5 stores in New York City. And I bring this up not because of the design specifically, but I think it's interesting to note that a large multinational corporation, they're owned by L'Oreal, would reach out to someone like me when they could have just got it done in vinyl. But they saw the value in having it done by hand. It worked really well with their whole campaign. In good hands, it was sort of a perfect fit. But I think it just shows that even corporations, it's on their radar, or at least some art directors' radar. So I think that's a good sign. It's a good sign. But I won't lie, there is some uncertainty about where things are headed, especially in recent months. But I don't know if we're going to get what we want from artificial intelligence. So in closing, I'll just say that I think as long as humans, or no, I guess before I say that, I'll say that at least for me, if I'm presented with the option of an artificial flavored ice cream or like an ice cream with real natural strawberries, I'm probably going to choose the one that has the real. So I think most people, at least that I've worked with, really do want the real thing versus the fake thing. And in closing, yeah, I'll just say that I think as long as humans have hands, are creative, and as long as humans have 2 hands, creativity, and a message, I think sign painting will be here for much longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was so good to see your process and such a great selection of your work. So do we have a couple of questions for Chris? Yeah.
Hi. So when you paint on glass, do you apply any sort of treatment to the paints so they don't deteriorate or flake off, or what is the process of painting on glass?
That's a good question. So for the window painting that I've done, I've used the enamel paint. I've painted both on interior and exterior surfaces for both short-term and long-term projects. And I always tell the client, like, both are, anything's possible. If it's on the outside, it is going to be exposed to the elements, and it theoretically could be scratched off. But it's as resilient. It's when it dries, it's basically like plastic. It's quite resilient. It's quite sturdy. Unless it's physically scraped, it's going to stick on pretty well. But if the company wants a logo on the outside for years and years and years, it will maybe need touch-ups, or I would recommend doing it on the inside. That's really like the traditional thing, is to do it on the inside, and the longevity is a bit more there. I've worked with clients, yeah, they just want like a short-term campaign thing, so we'll sometimes do water-based on the inside, and that usually works for a few weeks, and then that can be scraped off with a razor blade. Yeah, but no specific treatments to make it last longer. I've heard of people using like a clear coat and kind of trimming the edges, but I don't think it's the best solution.
All right, is there another question?
I just wanted to say that that was such a beautiful presentation, and I love how Canadian your work is. I loved the Tim Hortons cups that you did, and the flower products. I just thought that was so great. I was curious if there's any like dream projects of yours. Like, is there a company that you'd love to do a project for, or something that like really speaks to you?
Good question. Well, if it didn't come across in some of the personal projects, I really, really, really love food and eating and packaging. I would love to work on, well, I would love to work with like a grocery store or some sort of retail environment where I could do everything, products, signage, the whole deal, by hand, or some version of by hand. That would be the dream.
We have one more question. Yeah.
So amazing work. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. So I remember like in your presentation you mentioned a couple of times that the clients reach out to you, and I observed that you're from like different industries like films, also advertisements. And I'm curious, like as the artist who works in the analog way, what is the most comfortable and beneficial way to sort of advertise yourself, or just let the world know that there's such a person doing such a thing? I'm just curious about it. What's your way of doing that?
It's tough to answer. Like, the internet helps a lot. In a weird way, Google has helped me. Like, I don't know, I didn't plan it that way, but like if people search sign painting Canada, sign painting Toronto, like my work will pop up in Google Images. I don't know, and that's just over time. I guess it's just word of mouth. Social media helps a little bit, but I have a love-hate relationship with social media, kind of. There are networks, there's events like this, always help. But sign painters themselves are also really good at cross-promoting and kind of spreading the word amongst them. Yeah, that's all I could really say.
Do you feel like your appearance and some of the you sign painting in some of your work is part of it now? Just to add on to that? Like, are you going to have to, like the Wonder Bread one, it was interesting to see, and someone pretending to be a sign painter in the show with your work, right?
Oh yeah.
Is that part of it? Like people seeing you as the sign painter? Is that going to be a thing more?
Well, maybe it's nice to see that there's a person attached to the hand. I don't really know. I don't know.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for all those great questions, everyone.